I thought I had time. I thought I had everything under control. But when I turned around and saw him standing in the doorway, my heart stopped. My husband wasn't supposed to be home for another 2 days. I had checked his flight schedule, even texted him that morning, and he replied like always, telling me he was busy. I had convinced myself that I had nothing to worry about, that I had planned everything perfectly. But now, none of that mattered. His eyes locked onto me, but he wasn't just looking at me. He was seeing everything. The way I was standing too close to another man. The way I had been laughing just moments before, careless and free. The way my hand had rested on his arm like it belonged there. For a second, I couldn't breathe. He didn't say a word. Not yet, but I could feel his silence pressing down on me, heavier than any screaming or accusations ever could be. His suit jacket was still draped over one arm, his tie loosened just enough to show he had rushed home. The lines on his face were deeper than usual, his exhaustion from travel evident. But now his eyes were burning with something else. Betrayal. I stepped back, instinctively creating space between myself and the man standing beside me. That small movement alone made my husband's jaw tighten. The air in the room thickened like a storm waiting to explode. The word barely left my lips before I realized I had no idea what to say. No excuse would be enough. No explanation would undo what he just saw. The other man, completely unaware of the depth of the damage, had the nerve to smirk. "Looks like your husband's home early," he said casually, adjusting his shirt sleeve as if this was nothing more than an inconvenience. I could have hit him. My husband's gaze shifted to him, sharp and unyielding, but still he said nothing. He didn't need to. The weight of his silence was unbearable. I wanted to speak, to explain that this wasn't what it looked like, that I hadn't meant for it to get this far, that it had only been harmless messages at first, just words on a screen, that I had been lonely, desperate for attention, for connection. But even as those thoughts ran through my head, I knew how pathetic they sounded, because the truth was, I had let it happen. And now, standing in the doorway, my husband, the man who had built this life with me, the man who had trusted me, was looking at me like I was a stranger. His fingers clenched around his keys, knuckles turning white. A deep breath, slow and controlled. And then, without a single word, he turned on his heel and walked out. I stood there, frozen, as the sound of the front door closing behind him shattered through me like a bullet. I had broken something I could never fix. His face changed in an instant, first shock, then confusion, then something far worse, pain. His grip on his keys tightened as if they were the only thing grounding him. His breathing was slow, controlled, but his eyes burned with something she had never seen before. He wasn't just angry, he was breaking. She took a step forward, panic rising in her chest. "It's not..." The words barely left her lips before they stuck in her throat. What could she even say? That it wasn't what it looked like, that it was a mistake, that she hadn't planned for things to go this far. Every excuse sounded like a lie, even to her own ears. Her husband's gaze flickered between her and the man standing beside her, the stranger who had been so charming, so easy to talk to when loneliness became unbearable. The one who had filled the silence left behind by a marriage that had grown distant. But now, standing there with a smirk still tugging at his lips, he felt like nothing more than a mistake, a terrible, irreversible mistake. "Who is he?" Her husband's voice was low, controlled, but it held the weight of something dangerous. She hesitated, and that hesitation was enough. His jaw clenched, his body rigid as if holding himself back. The man beside her took a lazy step forward, his arrogance unbearable. "Relax, man. It's not that serious," he said casually, like this was nothing more than an unfortunate misunderstanding. Her stomach dropped. Her husband's hand curled into a fist, the veins in his arm pulsing with restrained anger. For a moment, it looked like he might swing, might let everything he was feeling explode into action. But then, just as quickly, he let out a sharp breath and stepped back. Not because he wasn't furious, because he was done. How long? His voice was quiet, but it cut through her like a blade. She swallowed hard, shaking her head. It wasn't... Her throat tightened. She couldn't even bring herself to say it. "That's all I need to know," he said, voice clipped, as if forcing the words out before he lost control. She could feel her world crumbling around her. This wasn't just a fight. This wasn't something a simple apology could fix. He wasn't just angry, he was hurt in a way that felt permanent. She had never seen him look at her like that, like she was nothing more than a stranger who had betrayed him. Her hands trembled as she reached for him, desperate to fix what she had just shattered. "Please, just let me explain." But he had already taken a step back, then another. The keys in his hand jingled as he turned on his heel and walked out the door, leaving her standing there, breathless, broken, and completely alone. The door slammed shut. And just like that, everything she had taken for granted was gone. The house felt different without him, empty, cold, too quiet. The air seemed heavier, suffocating her with the weight of everything she had done. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the door, half expecting him to walk back in, but deep down she knew he wouldn't. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. Her phone sat beside her, silent. No calls, no messages, nothing. She checked again, even though she already knew what she'd find: his silence. The absence of his words cut deeper than any insult ever could. She would have preferred yelling, anger, anything other than this void he had left behind. Her fingers trembled as she opened her message app, scrolling up to the last conversation they had that morning. Him: "Flight's on schedule. I'll see you soon." Her: "Okay, I'll be waiting." Waiting. That's what she had told him, but she hadn't been waiting for him, had she? The moment played over and over in her head, the way his face had changed, the way his voice had cracked when he asked how long, the way he had walked out without another word. A sharp knock at the front door made her flinch. For a split second, hope sparked in her chest, but as she rushed downstairs and opened it, that hope was crushed. Her mother stood there, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "Where is he?" The words were calm, but the weight behind them was heavy. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her mother sighed, stepping inside. "I saw his car speed past my house. I knew something was wrong. What did you do?" The shame hit hard. "Mom, please. Don't you dare ask me to feel sorry for you right now." Her mother's voice was firm, sharp. "What were you thinking? What did you expect would happen?" Tears stung her eyes. I don't know. I wasn't thinking." Her mother shook her head, disappointment clear in her expression. "You weren't thinking? That's your excuse?" She sank onto the couch, gripping her head. "I was lonely. He was always gone. I felt invisible." "And this is how you dealt with it? By throwing away your marriage? By disrespecting the man who worked himself to exhaustion for you?" She didn't answer. What could she say? Every justification sounded hollow, pathetic. Her mother sat beside her, her voice softer this time. "You made a mistake, a terrible one. Now you have to live with the consequences." Her phone buzzed, making her heart lurch. She snatched it up, eyes scanning the screen. Unknown number. With shaking hands, she answered. "Hello?" A cold, professional voice filled her ear. This is Matthew Carter from Reynolds and Associates, calling on behalf of your husband. He has requested legal consultation regarding your separation. We will be in touch with further details. The call ended before she could even process it. Her chest tightened, breath coming in shallow gasps. Separation, divorce. He wasn't just angry, he was done, and now she was truly alone. The car engine hummed beneath his hands, but he barely noticed. His grip on the steering wheel was tight, knuckles white, jaw clenched so hard it ached. He had no idea where he was going, no plan, no destination, just the need to be anywhere but there. The image was burned into his mind. Her standing too close to another man, her body language familiar, intimate. The hesitation in her voice when he asked how long. The way she reached for him, as if she could undo what had already been done. He pulled into a dimly lit parking lot, his breathing heavy, hands shaking. His chest ached, but it wasn't just anger, it was something deeper, something worse, a kind of pain he had never experienced before. Betrayal. He had spent years building a life with her, sacrificing time, pushing himself harder so they could have stability, comfort, and for what? So she could find comfort in someone else. His phone sat on the passenger seat, face down, silent. He didn't expect a message from her, and even if one came, what could she possibly say? Sorry? That it was a mistake? That she didn't mean it? Would any of that make a difference? He let out a bitter laugh, rubbing a hand over his face. He had spent so much time trusting her, believing in her. The thought of her sneaking behind his back, whispering to someone else, letting another man touch her, it made his stomach turn. Did she ever love him? Or had he just been convenient? A sharp pang hit his chest at the thought. No, it had to be real once. The way she used to look at him, the way she used to light up when he walked through the door. Had she been pretend? Pretending all along, or had she just stopped caring? A car pulled into the parking lot, headlights flashing across his windshield before shutting off. He glanced over and saw a couple stepping out, laughing, holding hands, lost in their own little world. That was supposed to be him and her. His fingers curled into a fist, resting against his thigh. He could walk away now, end it, cut his losses before she hurt him even more. But the thought of giving up so easily didn't sit right with him either. She had destroyed his trust, shattered everything they had built, but did that mean there was no way forward? He exhaled sharply, leaning his head back against the seat. He wouldn't rush into divorce. Not yet. If she truly regretted what she had done, she would have to prove it. Not with words, but with actions. This wouldn't be easy. He wouldn't forgive quickly, and maybe he never would. But one thing was certain. Things would never be the same again. The phone remained silent. No calls, no messages, no sign of him. Her fingers hovered over the screen, hesitating before typing yet another message. Please, just talk to me. I know I messed up. I need to see you. She stared at the words, debating whether to hit send. Would it even matter? Would he even read it? Her eyes burned with unshed tears as she placed the phone down, feeling the suffocating weight of guilt press against her chest. It had been days since he walked out, days of emptiness, of regret twisting inside her like a knife. She had called him 100 times, left voicemails, sent texts, each one met with nothing but silence. She had lost him. Her mother's voice echoed in her head, sharp and disappointed. You made a mistake. Now you have to live with the consequences. The words haunted her, replaying over and over, refusing to let her escape the truth. But living with the consequences didn't mean giving up. She deleted every trace of the man who had ruined her life, blocked his number, erased their conversations, deleted every picture. There was nothing left of him now, just as there should have never been in the first place. Then she picked up a pen and started writing. Dear love. Her hand trembled as she stared at the words. Could she still call him that? Did she even have the right? She swallowed hard and forced herself to continue. I don't deserve forgiveness. I don't deserve a second chance, but I need you to know the truth. She poured her heart onto the paper, confessing every ugly, painful truth she had buried deep inside. How she had felt lonely, neglected. How she let herself be blind to the damage she was causing. How it wasn't just a mistake. It was a choice, a selfish, thoughtless choice that had shattered the one person who had always stood by her. You were always enough. It was me who wasn't. She signed her name at the bottom, staring at the ink as it dried. Would this even reach him? Would he even care? The next morning, she left the letter with his sister, the only person who hadn't completely turned against her. He might not even read it, his sister warned, crossing her arms. I know, she whispered, but I had to try. The days stretched on, empty and painful. She started seeing a therapist, something she should have done long before things spiraled out of control. She faced the truth about herself, about her choices, about the broken pieces inside her that had led her to betray the man she still loved. Then, one night, her phone buzzed. Meet me tomorrow, one time, just to talk. Her heart pounded in her chest as she read his message, hands shaking. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't love, but it was a chance. She sat in the coffee shop, her hands wrapped around the warm cup, staring at the door. Every nerve in her body was on edge, waiting. Would he actually come, or had he just agreed to meet her to say goodbye in person? The thought made her chest tighten, but she forced herself to breathe. The door opened. He stepped inside, his face unreadable, his posture stiff. He looked like a man walking into battle, preparing for whatever came next. She wanted to rush to him, to reach for him, but she knew better. He wasn't hers to hold anymore. Not yet. Maybe not ever. He sat down across from her, his eyes scanning her face, searching for something. She wasn't sure what he was looking for, but she hoped he found it. Silence stretched between them before he finally spoke. Why did you do it? She flinched at the bluntness, but she had promised herself she wouldn't run from this. Not anymore. I was selfish, she admitted, her voice quiet. I let my loneliness turn into resentment, and instead of talking to you, I looked for something else to fill the space. His jaw clenched, and he looked away. So I was never enough? No, she said quickly. You were always enough. I was the one who was broken. Another heavy silence. She swallowed hard. I know an apology isn't enough. I know I can't take back what I did, but I want to try to fix this if... You'll let me. He exhaled sharply, rubbing a hand over his face. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Her chest tightened, but she nodded. I understand. I'm not saying I'm ready to forgive, he continued, but I'll agree to counselling. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. No secrets, no lies, full transparency. Hope flickered in her chest, but she kept it contained. I'll do whatever it takes. The sessions started slow. At first he barely spoke. She did most of the talking, admitting every mistake, owning her choices. The therapist made her confront the real reasons she had strayed, not just loneliness, but fear. Fear that she wasn't good enough, fear that he would leave her first. He listened, but he didn't soften. Weeks passed. She proved her commitment through actions, not just words. She gave him space, but remained present. She let him set the pace. One night, temptation returned, a text from the man she had betrayed him with. She didn't even hesitate before blocking the number. She didn't need validation from anyone but the man sitting across from her at their weekly counselling session. One night, after another difficult session, he let out a breath and reached for her hand. It was small, hesitant, but it was something. She squeezed back, tears stinging her eyes. Maybe, just maybe, they weren't completely broken. She sat across from him at the kitchen table, fingers gripping the edge of her coffee cup, waiting for him to speak. The months of therapy, the endless conversations, the slow, painful rebuilding of trust, it all led to this moment. He had been distant lately, quiet, his thoughts locked away where she couldn't reach them. She had done everything she could, but in the end, the decision wasn't hers to make. He looked at her, his expression unreadable, his hands resting on the table. "I've thought about this for a long time," he finally said, his voice calm, measured. "And I need to know, why do you still want this?" She inhaled sharply, steadying herself. "Because I love you. Because I destroyed the best thing in my life, and I don't want to spend the rest of my days regretting it." His eyes searched hers, as if trying to find the truth in her words. "Love isn't enough," he said. "I loved you, and you still betrayed me." She swallowed the lump in her throat. "I know," she whispered. "That's why I've been working on myself. That's why I've done everything I can to show you I've changed." He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "Do you really think we can go back to what we had?" "No," she admitted, "but maybe we can build something new." Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken emotions. "I don't know if I'll ever trust you the way I used to," he confessed, "but I don't want to throw everything away without trying." A tear slipped down her cheek as she nodded. "Then let's try. No expectations, no pretending everything is fine, just one day at a time." He reached for her hand, hesitant at first, then firm. His fingers laced with hers, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she let herself breathe. "We take it slow," he said. "No rushing, no pressure." "Of course." He studied her, his grip tightening slightly. "And if I ever feel like I can't do this, if I wake up one day and realize I don't want to try anymore." She swallowed hard, nodding. "Then I'll let you go." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he lifted her hand to his lips, pressing the softest kiss against her knuckles. It wasn't passion, it wasn't forgiveness, but it was hope. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be moments of doubt, moments of anger, moments when the past threatened to drag them under. But for now, they had a chance, and sometimes a chance was enough.